She fired me on a Thursday, not just any Thursday, the day before our $18 million European partnership was supposed to close. Our biggest regulatory audit was 48 hours away, and the CFTC was breathing down our necks about cryptocurrency compliance violations that could trigger federal criminal charges. But sure, let's toss the risk management director who wrote the very compliance framework keeping us out of federal prison. I'm Richard Patterson, 54 years old, and I'd spent 13 years at Velocity Financial Technologies keeping their asses out of regulatory hot water. Before that, I did 20 years in the Navy, where I learned that attention to detail keeps people alive. In corporate America, it keeps companies alive. But I'm getting ahead of myself here. Let me back up and tell you how this whole thing started. Back then, they called me the Compliance King. Some said it with respect. Others rolled their eyes like I was the hall monitor of high finance. My official title was Senior Risk Management Director, but what I really did was thread regulatory needles while everyone else played with cryptocurrency fire. I didn't make noise at company happy hours or play foosball during those ridiculous innovation sessions. I lived in federal banking regulations, CFTC rules, and international compliance frameworks. While other people flirted with disaster, I was building firewalls that would make Pentagon security jealous. I loved it, honestly. Give me a red pen, a 200-page regulatory filing, and black coffee, and I was happier than a kid in a candy store. Yeah, I know that sounds boring to most people, but after 2 decades in the Navy where one mistake could sink a ship, I found peace in getting the details right. At Velocity, I was the gray suit in a building full of hoodies and standing desks. Never flashy, never dramatic, just there. Dependable. I kept us compliant, profitable, and out of the news. 3 things nobody in our Austin office appreciated until everything started going sideways. Natalie Rodriguez sure didn't appreciate it. Natalie, our new Chief Strategy Officer, walked in like she owned the place, which technically she almost did since her mentor sat on our board of directors. She had that tech startup swagger, always speaking in buzzwords, always disrupting something and parking problems on other people's desks until they magically solved themselves. She hated what she called legacy infrastructure, which was corporate speak for anyone who remembered why we had rules in the first place. I was legacy infrastructure. That made me a target, not in the dramatic sense, but in the you represent everything I want to eliminate sense. Natalie didn't want guardrails. She wanted yes men who would rubber stamp her deals faster than she could pitch them to TechCrunch. Me? I wanted to actually read the international banking clause that waived our rights to appeal regulatory decisions. Call me old-fashioned, but I preferred staying out of federal court. Before Natalie showed up, life at Velocity was actually pretty peaceful. I'd start my day reviewing overnight compliance alerts and a spreadsheet of pending transactions. I liked the puzzle aspect of it. Every deal was a minefield I could diffuse with the right regulatory language. I'd spent 13 years building a system where even if everyone around me lost their minds chasing the next big crypto trend, the compliance framework wouldn't crack. I was the seatbelt in a car full of speed demons. They didn't like when I hit the brakes, but they were still in business because of it. Here's something people forget about companies like ours. The person who writes the rules quietly becomes the most dangerous person in the building. They just don't realize it until it's too late. Natalie blew in like an energy drink commercial with a Stanford MBA and connections to every venture capital firm in Silicon Valley. First day, she parked in the CEO's spot, high-fived the receptionist like they were old college roommates, and announced to the entire office, "Time to scale this rocket ship vertically, people," which, translated from startup speak, meant cut the safety protocols, ignore the regulations, and pray we don't crash into a mountain of federal charges. You could practically hear the bandwidth groan under her ego. She was charming in that fast-talking, spin-you-around kind of way, had that fake, humble charisma that made interns worship her and board members nod approvingly. The kind of person who ended every sentence with "make sense." Like your understanding was part of her genius. She didn't just disregard legacy staff. She treated us like expired software. The second she found out I'd been here over a decade, she smiled like I'd just confessed to still using a flip phone. "I prefer fresh perspectives," she said once, teeth gleaming. People who think outside traditional frameworks, which, of course, meant people who didn't remember how we got investigated by the CFTC in 2019 for this exact type of reckless deal-making. Within weeks, she'd started steamrolling through partnership agreements like they were terms of service nobody reads. Sales loved her. engineering worshipped her. And compliance? Compliance was being frozen out of strategy calls, excluded from deal negotiations, and handed final contracts 10 minutes before signature deadlines. It was like watching someone build a skyscraper without checking if the foundation could hold the weight, except they were using dynamite instead of concrete. So that's how I ended up in this mess. 13 years of careful work, 20 years of military discipline, and one reckless executive who thought rules were suggestions. What happened next changed everything. Then came the breaking point. A partnership contract landed on my desk, retroactively, of course, and it didn't just raise red flags, it set off air raid sirens. It was a strategic licensing deal with a European fintech consortium that looked brilliant on paper. Clean numbers, solid projections, the kind of partnership that makes investors drool. But here's the thing about my job. I don't look at the pretty pictures on top. I dig into the technical specifications buried on page 47. That's where I found the landmine. Buried in the boilerplate was language that directly violated our CFTC registration requirements. Worse, it could trigger mandatory criminal referrals under international banking law. We're talking about cryptocurrency transaction reporting that bypassed federal oversight entirely. The kind of violation that doesn't just get you fined, it gets you investigated. That's not just oops, we'll fix it later bad. That's federal agents at your door at 6 a.m. bad. Look, I'd seen plenty of questionable deals over the years. Startup culture loves pushing boundaries, testing limits, seeing how much they can get away with. But this wasn't creative interpretation of regulations. This was straight up illegal. So I did what I'd done thousands of times before. I flagged it carefully, professionally, sent a detailed memo through proper channels, copied compliance, even tagged our external regulatory consultant. I didn't shout, didn't make it political, just outlined the liability exposure like I'd been doing for 13 years. The memo was 3 pages long, with specific citations to CFTC Regulation 4.7 and International Banking Compliance Code 12A. I attached supporting documentation, highlighted the exact clauses that created criminal exposure, and provided 3 alternative structures that would accomplish the same business goals legally. 2 hours later, I got summoned to Natalie's office. Actually, let me rephrase that. I got summoned to her glass fishbowl conference room where she liked holding meetings like a reality show producer. The woman was allergic to privacy. Everything had to be visible. Everything had to be performance. I walked in, sat down, and waited. She didn't offer coffee or small talk, just leaned against her standing desk, sipping something green and expensive from a company-branded tumbler. She was wearing one of those blazers that cost more than most people's rent, the kind that screams, "I have an MBA and I'm not afraid to use it." "You don't like the European deal?" she said without looking at me. "It violates our CFTC registration and triggers criminal liability under international banking." She held up a finger like she was silencing a child. "Nobody cares about compliance theater, Richard." Richard. She said it like she was doing me a favor by using my actual name instead of that old guy from risk management. "This isn't theater," I said, keeping my voice level. "This is federal law. The partnership structure creates unreported cryptocurrency flows that—" "Richard." She finally looked at me, and her smile wasn't friendly. "You're not sales. You're not strategy. You're not even an executive. You're support staff." My vision didn't blur from anger. I dealt with plenty of people who underestimated experience. It blurred from the sheer stupidity of what she was about to unleash on this company. "Stay in your lane," she continued, that smile getting uglier. "We don't need permission slips to do business." Here's what she didn't understand. In the Navy, we had a saying, "The person who knows where the mines are buried controls the whole damn ocean." I'd spent 13 years burying regulatory mines around this company, not to hurt it, but to protect it. Every compliance framework, every risk assessment protocol, every legal safeguard had my fingerprints on it. Natalie thought she was captaining a rocket ship. What she didn't realize was that I'd quietly built the self-destruct sequence, and she'd just entered the activation code. I could have exploded, could have pulled out documentation, dropped 13 years' worth of receipts, showing how my compliance theater had saved this company millions in penalties and kept executives out of orange jumpsuits. Could have explained that the last time someone ignored my warnings about international banking law, the SEC imposed a $23 million fine that nearly bankrupted our biggest competitor. But I didn't. I just nodded. Small, deliberate, calm. Understood, I said. Because in that moment, I knew something she didn't. I'd written the very NDA agreement that governed my employment. 3 years ago, when our general counsel asked me to revise the standard contracts for senior compliance staff, I'd included specific protections for exactly this situation. Paragraph 12B, the indemnity clause. My insurance policy. I spent that night staring at the ceiling, replaying her words like evidence at a court-martial. Stay in your lane, compliance theater, support staff. My jaw hurt from clenching, not because she'd insulted me, that part was expected, but because I knew what she was about to unleash on the company. The next morning I followed protocol, because after 20 years in the Navy and 13 years in corporate compliance, I am protocol. First, I drafted a comprehensive risk assessment outlining every violation in that European partnership. 3 pages became 7 pages as I dug deeper into the regulatory implications. I cited specific CFTC regulations, cross-referenced international banking law precedents, attached supporting documentation from similar cases that had resulted in criminal prosecution. No emotion, no opinions, just pure regulatory analysis. The kind of document that would make federal prosecutors salivate if they ever got their hands on it. Then I escalated it through proper channels: compliance, legal, our external regulatory firm, even our board liaison. I didn't go nuclear. I let the facts speak, documented every step, timestamp every communication. Then I waited. 3 days of radio silence, no acknowledgement, no follow-up questions, no requests for clarification. It was like shouting into a void, except the void was about to shout back. On the 4th day, I got a calendar invite that changed everything. The calendar invite had an innocent subject line: strategic alignment discussion. Sounds harmless, right? Except it was scheduled in the main conference room, the one with floor-to-ceiling glass walls usually reserved for investor presentations and all-hands meetings. When you've been in corporate America as long as I have, you learn to read the signs. Emergency meetings in fishbowl conference rooms with vague subjects aren't about strategy alignment. They're about career termination. I showed up anyway. What else was I going to do? There were already people inside when I walked in. Natalie, obviously, arms crossed like a prosecutor about to deliver a verdict. 3 department heads studying their phones like they contained the secrets of the universe. And Lisa Harper, our company attorney, shuffling through a manila folder like she'd rather be anywhere else on planet Earth. The energy in that room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Nobody made eye contact. Nobody offered coffee or small talk. This wasn't a meeting. It was an execution. I stepped in and took a seat. No handshake offered, no chair pulled out for me. Professional courtesy had left the building. Natalie didn't even wait for the door to close. "We're terminating your employment," she said like she was reading a weather report. "Effective immediately for insubordination and breach of confidentiality." "Breach of," I started, more confused than angry. "You exceeded your authority," she cut me off. "You escalated confidential deal information outside your scope of responsibility. Your risk management, not executive leadership. You abused internal channels to delay critical business operations." I could feel every eye in the room looking for somewhere else to land. Even Lisa stopped shuffling papers. The silence was so thick you could hear the air conditioning humming 3 floors up. Then Natalie reached into her folder and slapped down a copy of my NDA agreement like she was playing a winning poker hand. "I'd remind you that this agreement includes strict confidentiality and non-disparagement clauses," she said, tapping the document with her finger. "Any further discussion of internal matters outside approved channels will be considered a violation, which, as you know, carries personal financial liability." She smiled. Actually smiled, like this was checkmate, like she'd just shut me up permanently with my own contract. That's when it hit me. She was waving around my NDA like it was some kind of legal weapon, but she had no idea what was actually in it. See, here's the thing Natalie didn't know. 3 years ago, our general counsel at the time asked me to revise the standard employment agreements for senior compliance staff. We'd been dealing with increased regulatory scrutiny, and he wanted anyone raising legitimate regulatory concerns to have whistleblower protections and legal indemnification. I'd spent 2 weeks crafting language that would shield compliance officers from exactly this type of retaliation. Paragraph 12B was my masterpiece. an indemnity clause that activated the moment someone got fired for doing their job properly. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out my copy. Not the standard version Natalie was waving around, but my personal copy with 3 years of revision notes in the margins and key clauses highlighted in yellow. I slid it slowly across the glass table toward Lisa, my finger tapping exactly where it mattered. Paragraph 12B, I said, calm as Sunday morning, indemnity clause. Lisa's face went the color of copy paper. You could see the exact moment it clicked. Her eyes widened, her shoulders tensed, and she suddenly looked like someone who'd just realized they were standing in a minefield. Natalie didn't understand. Not yet. She was still riding high on her power trip, still thinking she'd outsmarted the old guy with his own paperwork. So I turned to her and said, I didn't breach confidentiality, Natalie. I followed established protocol for regulatory escalation under federal whistleblower protections. And now you've triggered the indemnity clause. What the hell does that mean? She snapped. Lisa cleared her throat. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. It means the company has to pay his legal fees. All of them. With no cap. The room went dead silent. You could hear a pin drop in the parking garage. What legal fees? Natalie demanded. But you could see the confidence starting to crack around the edges. I stood up, straightened my tie, and looked her right in the eye. The ones I'm going to rack up when I report this entire conversation to the CFTC, along with that European partnership contract you're so eager to sign. That's when the color drained from her face. See, here's what paragraph 12B actually said. In the event of involuntary termination following documented regulatory escalation, the company shall indemnify the employee for all legal expenses incurred in defense and counteraction, inclusive of damages with no financial cap, time limit, or liability exemption. Translation: if they fired me for doing my compliance job properly, they had to pay for my lawyers. And my lawyers were about to get very, very expensive. I didn't argue, didn't ask for a box to pack my things, didn't make a scene or storm out dramatically. I just walked out of that conference room like I was heading to lunch, calm as a cardiac surgeon. There's a power in silence that loud people never understand. Security didn't escort me out. That was their first mistake. Nobody thought to revoke my system access immediately. That was their second mistake. And nobody bothered to check what paragraph 12B actually said before they fired me. That was their final mistake. Back at my workstation, I calmly opened my laptop and began downloading files. Not stealing secrets, just recovering documentation of my own work. 13 years of compliance audits, flagged memos, escalation emails, and regulatory correspondence, all time-stamped, all traceable, all sent through official company channels. I didn't need to hack anything. I had metadata going back to 2011. Then I shut the laptop, walked to the front desk, handed over my building access card with a smile that probably haunted the security guard for weeks, and drove home. By the time I pulled into my driveway, my phone was already buzzing with texts from former colleagues. The whispers had started, and Natalie was about to learn what happens when you threaten someone who wrote the rules of the game. The next morning brought a cease and desist email, technically from HR, but the language screamed Natalie. It claimed my post-employment communications regarding internal company matters may constitute NDA violations and demanded I refrain from any further discussion of confidential business information. I laughed so hard I nearly spilled my coffee. Then I saved the email to a folder labeled Additional Retaliation Evidence and made a note. Attempted suppression of whistleblower protections. Confirmed. I didn't respond. The indemnity clause had already activated. Their attempt to intimidate me into silence was just building my case stronger. Here's what they didn't understand. I wasn't some disgruntled employee shooting my mouth off to anyone who'd listen. I was a former Navy officer with 13 years of compliance experience who knew exactly how to wage legal warfare. My first call was to Amanda Torres, employment litigation specialist, former federal prosecutor, and the kind of lawyer who made opposing counsel reach for antacids. I'd recommended her to our previous legal team when a department head tried to retaliate against a junior analyst for reporting expense fraud. She'd settled that case so fast it left skid marks. "Amanda," I said when she picked up, "it's time. No explanation needed." She remembered me. She remembered paragraph 12B. We met at her office 2 days later in a conference room that felt like a war room. I laid out everything. email archives, flagged memos, contract violations, the termination meeting transcript I'd written immediately afterward, the cease and desist attempt. Her eyes scanned each page like a surgeon looking for the exact place to make the cut. Halfway through my presentation, she held up a hand and said, "Stop talking. You've already won. Now we make them understand exactly how badly they've lost." Together, we drafted what lawyers call a pre-litigation demand letter. It wasn't angry, it wasn't threatening, it was surgical. Paragraph 1, the NDA Clause 12B, quoted verbatim, the indemnity trigger, the whistleblower protections, the fact that Velocity was now legally obligated to pay for my legal fees, their legal fees, and any damages, whether civil or criminal. Paragraph 2, documentation of retaliation, termination immediately following protected regulatory escalation, cease and desist attempt as witness intimidation, CFTC level exposure that could trigger federal investigation. Paragraph 3, a polite invitation to resolve this quietly before we contacted relevant regulatory authorities. We didn't send it to HR, we didn't send it to Natalie. We sent it directly to Velocity's outside legal counsel, the white shoe law firm that represented the board of directors. But I didn't stop there. That same day, I made what I called a professional courtesy call to Patricia Wells, a CFTC compliance auditor I'd worked with on previous industry reviews. Sharp, ethical, and curious enough to be dangerous. "Hey Patricia, quick question," I said casually. "What's the current threshold for companies to self-report potential criminal violations in international cryptocurrency partnerships?" Long pause. She knew exactly what I was doing. "I'd check the updated guidance on cross-border compliance," she said slowly. "And maybe, if I were you, I'd send me something unofficial. I'll decide if it warrants follow-up." I sent her a carefully organized PDF packet within an hour. No accusations, just observations, footnotes, questions, red flags arranged like breadcrumbs leading to federal court. Meanwhile, back at Velocity, panic was spreading like wildfire. From what I heard through the corporate grapevine, Amanda's letter had landed on the board's legal counsel like a bomb. Within 48 hours, the expensive law firm was reaching out to Natalie. Not with questions, with silence. The kind of deliberate, terrifying silence that fills a room before the fire alarms go off. The board called an emergency meeting. No agenda, no catered lunch, no PowerPoint presentations. Just 7 directors, outside counsel dialing in with grim voices, and a stack of documents labeled Immediate Exposure Assessment. Natalie wasn't invited. That alone sent shockwaves through the entire company. The lead attorney began her presentation with a deep breath and no pleasantries. "We've received pre-litigation notice from a former employee. The central issue is paragraph 12B of his employment agreement." She read it aloud. "In the event of involuntary termination following documented regulatory escalation, the company shall indemnify the employee for all legal expenses incurred in defense and counteraction, inclusive of damages, with no financial cap, time limit, or liability exemption." Then she turned the page. There's more. "The employee has initiated contact with CFTC compliance authorities. He has documentation proving his termination directly followed protected regulatory escalation." One director finally spoke. "What's our exposure?" "Unlimited," counsel replied. "Financially, reputationally, and legally. He has 13 years of documentation. His work is time-stamped and traceable. The indemnity clause is airtight." The story broke on a Tuesday morning. No byline, no direct quotes, just surgical reporting by a financial industry publication known for ending careers with polite, devastating prose. Headline: "Fintech Executives' Reckless Deals Trigger Federal Review, Legal Retaliation." The article outlined everything with brutal precision, a pattern of regulatory violations and international partnerships signed without proper compliance review. An internal whistleblower raising red flags, then mysteriously terminated. A previously unknown indemnity clause creating massive liability exposure. They didn't use my name. They didn't need to. Natalie lasted exactly 3 more days. The board issued a statement so short and cold it could have been a death certificate. Effective immediately, the chief strategy officer has been suspended pending internal review. Her access was revoked within the hour. Building keycard, company Slack, email accounts, gone. She showed up that morning wearing her usual power blazer and was turned away by security. People said she just stood there in the lobby holding a Starbucks cup while the card reader blinked red. 3 months later, I got a settlement offer that made my retirement very comfortable. Velocity paid my legal fees, Amanda's fees, and enough extra to make sure I never had to worry about money again. The European partnership deal was quietly canceled. Patricia's CFTC review resulted in new compliance protocols that looked remarkably similar to the ones I'd been recommending for years. And Natalie? Last I heard, she was working at a startup in Portland, telling people her previous company wasn't a good cultural fit. Sometimes the old guy wins. Sometimes experience beats arrogance. And sometimes when you spend 13 years quietly building safeguards, those safeguards end up protecting you too. The funny thing is, I actually miss the work. Not the politics, not the egos, but the actual compliance work. There's something satisfying about building systems that keep people safe, even when they don't appreciate it. These days, I consult for smaller firms that actually listen when I tell them about regulatory risks. Amazing how much easier the job gets when people respect your expertise instead of treating it like an inconvenience. Paragraph 12B taught them that lesson the hard way.